We're going to begin here today, as we generally do, with a larger square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water to condense the bristles, to allow me to keep the paint wet longer, and to help me drag the paint out farther. Then I'm going to grab a good amount of titanium white, move that down here on my palette. I'm going to grab even more primary blue, mix those two together, and then I'm going to grab a good bit of Mars black, about half as much as we grabbed of the other pigments. And this is going to render a dark, semi-desaturated blue, which will be a great start for our sky here. This is a night sky. It's meant to be a little bit darker, but it is going to have some light from the moon and the stars. Now, I'm actually going to leave the sky very simple. We're not going to do a large gradient in it because I don't want to distract from the glow of the moon or the stars. But we are going to get into the stars now. I'm going to take my smaller round-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water here. Then I'm going to head over to my palette, grab some titanium white, move it to a new area, grab a lot more water, mix that in there until I have almost the consistency of watercolor. Going to put my palette down, peel the bristles back on my brush, and launch some stars at the canvas, as you can see right there. It's a very quick, easy, and efficient way of creating hundreds of little stars of varying shapes and sizes, and making them smaller than you ever could with a tapping effect of the brush. Now that we've given the chance to dry, as you can tell, it's a little bit darker than it was, and that's because acrylic paints tend to dry slightly darker than when they are wet or on your palette. But I really like that. I think that it gives it a really rich sky color. So now we're going to take our smaller round-headed brush. We're going to take some titanium white. I'm going to try to find the moon that I have here on the canvas, and I'm going to do an outline of it with this titanium white while my brush is still nice and damp. When your brush is damp, the bristles tend to stick together and paint spreads much more effectively. So I like to do all of my line work and all of the intricate detailed pieces first, and then I'll move in towards the center of the moon and fill that in, because it's not as detail oriented and you don't need as smooth as a stroke like we do when we're just plotting in our initial application. Now, while we wait for our moon to dry, we can actually begin to work on the clouds up here as well. They're all going to be moonlit, so they're going to get very bright, nice edges. And we're going to start these clouds with some titanium white, a hint of our primary blue so that it gets the nice reflection of the sky color, and a hint of Mars black as well. And this is going to give us a nice base for them. So we're making these very soft to begin with. I'm using the smaller round-headed brush because it does have those rounded feathered edges, which is great for making clouds because clouds don't have sharp edges. Instead, they are much more soft and much more transparent. You get little gradients along all of the edges that fade into the rest of the sky, and it looks really beautiful. I'm trying to make the edges of my clouds much more tapered and small. And then once I've applied them, if I feel like the edges are a little bit sharp, I'll move around the edge with a wet brush in circular strokes. And this is just going to give me a very soft edge. And I like to do this especially at the bottom of clouds, and I might keep the tops a little bit more sharp. I'm now going to take a little bit of our titanium white, our water, mix those together, get a very thin titanium white. I'm going to apply it around the moon. I'm going to create a little bit of a glow. So I'm starting from the edges of the moon, and then I'm working my way out. Then I'm going to take all of the paint off my brush, going to head back in with a fairly damp brush, and in a circular motion I'm going to blend out that highlighted application we just worked in. And just like that, we're going to have a glowing effect that looks very bright around the moon, and then as you get towards the outskirts, it begins to dissipate and get darker and darker. And we're going to move on to the back layer of trees. Now these trees here, they're going to be oranges, they're going to be reds, they're going to be yellows, but they need a base layer, something to build all of those on top of. And it's nighttime, so that base layer needs to be quite dark. And it also needs to be a little bit blue because we're going to get a lot of reflected light and maybe even some mist in the background running through the trees. So I'm going to start with a fairly dark blue. I'm going to grab some Mars Black, mix that in with the darker blue that we had for the water. I'm going to draw a line right across the horizon, right where the water meets the land. Then I'm going to brighten it up a little bit. I'm going to take some extra primary blue and a hint of titanium white, mix those in together. Then I'm going to do the next line, right above it and blending into it. Just like that. I know what you're thinking, that's a very strange color for trees in the fall. But trust me, it'll turn out really well. And the next portion, I could wait for that to dry and begin working on the reflection of the trees and the actual trees on the top, but I'm actually going to work on the reflection of the moon. So now I'm going to take a smaller round-headed brush, as you can see, going to dip that in some water, head over to my palette, grab some titanium white, hint of primary blue, mix those two up, and I'm going to look right below our moon. I'm going to start doing some reflections back and forth. But I'm trying to get a nice opaque application in the middle, and then I blend off to the left and the right hand side. Each time I do that, my paint should dissipate more and more and get more transparent. I want it to get smaller as well in stroke. So in the very middle of the reflection, there's a large stroke. It's very opaque. And then as you move to the side, you blend it more, becomes more transparent, and it gets smaller. Now that this here is completely dry, and it needs to be completely dry, I'm going to take an older square-headed brush. This is one where the bristles just leaf off in varying directions. And I'm going to create some fall colors. I'm going to begin by taking some primary red and some primary yellow. I'm going to mix those two together, and we're going to get a nice orange. Now this is a fairly even orange, yellow and red-wise, and we make it by using about 2/3 of our primary yellow and 1/3 of our primary red. Primary red's a much stronger pigment, so when you want a natural orange, you need to use a little bit more of our primary yellow. Now it's going to be quite thin because we only use primary colors and they're very thin paints, and the blue would show through a lot of it. So I'm going to grab some titanium white, I'm going to grab just a hint, and I do mean a hint of Mars Black, and then I'm going to blend the two together until we get a nice orange here. From there, I'm going to head back over to my canvas, and I'm going to tap on some nice orange foliage. You can see a lot of the blue showing through and in between these applications, and that's actually fantastic. That's really what we want. It's going to make it look like there's a blue mist in the background behind and moving through our trees. Now I'm going to take some primary red, going to move that down into our mixture a little bit. I'm going to grab slightly more Mars Black, and now I'm going to have this more peachy orange color to work in there instead. So I'm going to start yet again from the top. I'm going to tap downwards. There we are. Now let's work on the reflections of them. So in the background I have some dark red. I'll start with that. Mirroring that top area. I can also see some dark red on the top over here. Throw that in. And over here as well. Now I'm going to take more of our orangey, titanium white, Mars Black mixture, and I'm going to throw that down on top of a lot of the water here. That way we get out of the way the chance of making that green. And now I'm going to add some proper highlights back up into the tops of the trees. I needed to wait for them to dry a little bit, that way we didn't create mud. But here now I have some proper primary yellow and titanium white. Can really throw this on in a couple of areas. And with that, we can actually begin working on our trees. And we're going to do so with the large pieces of foliage up here. I'm going to take my older square-headed brush, going to grab some of our primary red, going to grab just a hint of our primary yellow, give it a little bit of an orange tint, but not much, because I'm going to mix a good bit of Mars black in it. I don't want it to turn green. I'm also going to grab a hint of titanium white, which will brighten it, but that is okay. So now I'm going to find the edges of my trees. I'm going to tap in this effect as you see here, rotating my brush fairly frequently and creating these diverse, interesting edges. Now that our trees have dried fairly well, I'm going to go back to my palette. I'm going to grab a good amount of primary yellow, this time just a hint of primary red to give it a tiny bit of that orange tint, and a good bit of titanium white to really brighten it up. And this will be perfect for the true edges of our painting here. So I'm going to begin tapping those along. As you can see, it's very similar to the color that we have down in here. I'm starting on my edges. I'm applying very little pressure, that way the bristles don't expand and I get these nice concise applications. Now that we have that incredibly bright edge that was formed with the yellow, we can finally go in and layer a very light orange. And that's because we can only really layer very light colors over light colors if we don't want them to optically blend and see the darker color through it. So now that we have a nice thick, bright color, I can take my primary yellow, I can take my primary red, make a really nice, bright, saturated orange. Now I can take this and apply it over my edges, and now it'll pop much better because we have that bright base layer to work on top of. Now, of course, our painting is still quite far from finished. We don't have the actual trees painted in, so we're going to do some of that now. I'm going to take my medium-sized square-headed brush, wipe that off, grab some Mars black paint, grab a little bit of titanium white paint, make a very dark gray base layer, and now I'm going to draw in all of the lines from my birch trees. I'm going to start with the actual edges because my brush is very damp and sharp right now. And then as I begin to lose the paint, I will work inwards. There we go. Now that the bark is fairly dry, I'm going to grab my medium-sized square-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, grab some titanium white paint, grab some Mars black paint, not too much. I want about an even gray here, like you can see. And then I'm going to apply this to the edges of my tree, which are facing the moon. And I'm going to do a slight drag backwards, as you can see. Now, take some titanium white, make it brighter pigment, come towards the edge, apply it. I have a lot of paint on here, so I don't want to drag back just yet, because I might accidentally take out all of the gray from our pre-existing layers. So I'm just going to apply some of this wet paint to the painting, and then we'll come back and blend it. There we are. Now I'm going to wipe off my brush, make it a little bit wet, and this paint should still be, there we go, yeah, quite wet. So I'm able to drag that back a little bit in the same way we did on the previous birch tree. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.